We are at the forefront of many innovative and exciting things developing in the world of senior living. With Tim Mallad, CEO of Forefront Living, as our guide, this show will shine a light on how older adults can embrace these changes to live active, happy, fulfilling, and thriving lives. Through discussions with senior living and hospice professionals, architects and designers, and people of all ages, will help today's seniors envision the art of the possible and take steps toward achieving the future of their dreams. Welcome to At the Forefront.
Hello, I'm Tim Mallad, CEO of Forefront Living, and welcome today. We're about to have a great discussion. We're going to be talking about continuing care retirement communities, something that is near and dear to my heart and the heart of all of those that work at Forefront Living. Today's seniors have so many choices. I am currently celebrating my 35th year in senior living, and the industry has just developed into a myriad of choices for seniors. Some of them are very good, some of them are complex, and there's a myriad of them. They range from solely independent living, solely assisted living, solely skilled nursing, to options for seniors to stay at home. One of the things that we believe in as an organization is a continuing care retirement community concept where the organization has all levels of living available to residents and can allow them to pick and choose services as they're needed. So I'm very pleased today to have three individuals whom I consider experts in senior living. The first to join us is Steve and Ailey. Steve is the Chief Financial Officer for Forefront Living. Steve has been working in the industry for a little bit more than 2 decades. Next is George Lineal. George is the President and CEO of Leading Age of Texas. George represents about 230 nonprofit senior living providers across the state of Texas, and I believe George is on the cusp of celebrating his 21st year at Leading Age. And last but certainly not least is Pam Altizer. And Pam has a very unique background. Pam was a senior manager at Accenture, which is a management consulting and strategy group. She was a North American lead engagement director at the George Group from 1998 to 2008, was at Texas Instruments from 1984 to 1998, and currently serves on a number of local boards in the city of Dallas. And I think the really unique perspective that Pam can bring today is Pam is a second generation CCRC resident. Pam and her mother Betty started the journey around 2004, 2005, looking particularly at CCRC residences or choices, and currently they live together at Presbyterian Village North in separate units. Pam and her husband Goose are residents, as well as her mother Betty. So with that, we're going to begin our discussion, and George, welcome.
Thank
you.
You.
I think the very first question I have for you is, can you tell us a little bit about Leading Age and what Leading Age does?
Certainly. Well, you already mentioned we have about 230 members, and we represent primarily the not-for-profit providers of care and services for seniors, and that range from the whole gamut, from CCRCs to standalone assisted living, standalone nursing homes, hospice, home care, and even community-based services. So it's a broad spectrum. The common thread is that we're all not-for-profits, and there is a difference. We call it the not-for-profit difference.
Can you tell us a little bit about
Sure.
what that difference is?
I think it's the transparency, is that every not-for-profit is required to make all their finances transparent. So anyone can look up a 990 on any 501c3 organization and find out how they're doing financially. And also, our doors are, our doors and our data are always open. The other thing I will say is generally, and there's a lot of data to support this, that not-for-profits generally provide better care and really put residents first. Because they're driven by mission rather than profit. And there's a lot of, the other thing I would say is longevity, because most of our members, I think our youngest member is probably 25 years old, and our oldest is 165 years old.
Yeah, can you tell us a little bit about that, George? Because you're using the term CCRC, which is an acronym for Continuing Care Retirement Communities. We've talked about nonprofit, and we've talked about, the longevity.
Right.
How are they all related? Where did the concept of CCRCs come from, and the relationship with nonprofits?
Well, I think the whole care for seniors started back, in the early 1700s. I think Ben Franklin actually had something to do with that in Pennsylvania. And over time, they've sort of grown and developed. There were a lot of what they used to call homes for the aged. And I think over time, and particularly, you look at generational changes. And I think our current baby boomer generation is really changing the field of senior living, because it used to be that, first of all, back in the day, people didn't live as long. When you retired, you did just that. But I think today's resident, it's very common to have 100-year-old residents. And I know you've had some guests on the show over 100. But residents don't want to stop living. They want to continue to grow and develop and learn and do things that they've always wanted to do. And I think that's the really big difference that's happening in senior living today. It's no longer just, I'm going to sit and read or, just do mundane things. I really want to continue to grow and develop, regardless of my age.
George, you're here in Dallas because Leading Age held an annual conference the first time, I guess, in a couple of years, and a number of the members were together, and you and I had a chance to sit down with some this morning. And as far as backgrounds of the individuals operating the nonprofit side, can you maybe shed some light on the discussion we had this morning? I think it was really an intriguing introduction to our fellow members.
Sure. I think the real aspect is that everyone who, at least I can speak to our members, are in it for, I'd say, the right reasons. They're in it for because they love to serve. They're servant leaders. They want to take care of the residents and want their residents to continue to grow and learn. I think everyone around our board was certainly had some life experience, or some of them just sort of fell into senior living, and then they decided, this is my mission. This is what I really want to do. And I find so many of our leaders have sort of gotten into the field and just stuck with it because they find so much fulfillment in seeing residents really grow and develop, as I said earlier.
Yeah, this morning the CEO of Methodist Retirement Communities mentioned that one of his passions was that seniors would thrive, and that of course aligns very much so with what Forefront Living does. Is that possible in a continuing care retirement community?
I'd say absolutely they can thrive, as long as they have the resources and the opportunities. And I think CCRCs in general offer a lot of opportunities. I think you look at a lot of our members who have, they really place a lot of value on activities and on life development. And most of our members have chaplains, and most of our members have other types of life-fulfilling kind of jobs that help residents really grow.
How many CCRCs are there across the nation?
Well, there's about 1,900 or so, and I think what's interesting to note about that is about 75% of those have been in operation for over 25 years. And in Texas, I think it's about 63% that have been in operation over 25 years. So it's I know there's been some, people probably have concerns about financial stability and all that, but it's a model that works, and it's a proven model that works because it's been around for such a long time.
Are the majority of those entry fee?
Some are entry fee. There's a whole variety, and I would say probably the majority do have some sort of entry fee model. and there are different types of contracts, but I would say the majority do have an entry fee.
So George, Leading Age has been helping those that serve seniors and serving seniors themselves for a very long time. What do you see on the horizon as far as some changes and what may be coming?
Well, our field is evolving very rapidly. I think the pandemic has had a huge effect on sort of the choices that people have made. I think in general, people who have lived in senior living during the pandemic actually fared better than those who were at home. In terms of health, in terms of social activity and things like that, I know it was very difficult. So I think occupancy has been an issue, but I see that coming back now. But I think our biggest issue right now is workforce. We need to attract more people to our field. And I think, as I said earlier, those who just get introduced and learn a little bit about it and have some experience working in the field, they really grasp onto it. So we need to expose the field to more younger folks. I mean, there are very few programs, college programs, that prepare people to work in the field. University of North Texas used to be the premier program in the country, actually, for gerontology. That program is no longer there. So we need to find other vehicles to attract people to working in this field.
Well, we actually had a 30-year-old in the room who's a skilled nursing administrator, and that was maybe under 30, actually.
Yeah.
That was actually pretty exciting.
It was very exciting because he said he knew from his teenage years that he wanted to be a nursing home administrator. And I was sort of floored by that. And he lives in a rural area of Texas, so it's kind of interesting, and I'm glad there are people out there like that, and we need more.
Absolutely. Well, I have two final questions for you. I think the first one is, are there organizations that govern CCRCs? Our membership with Leading Age is voluntary, and it's an association of like-minded individuals, but are there governmental agencies that look over senior living?
Sure. Yeah, there absolutely are. On the financial side, since in general, CCRCs are insurance products because you're paying an entry fee depending on the type of contract, but you're paying an entry fee to ensure that you have life care. So it's actually governed by the Department of Insurance. There's about 33 or so CCRCs that are regulated by the Department of Insurance in Texas. And there's also the skilled areas of a CCRC, the nursing home and assisted living, and those are both governed by regulations from the Health and Human Services Commission. So those have a lot of rules that people have to follow.
Absolutely.
And those rules actually, most of them come down from CMS, Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, and those are instituted by the State Department.
And then finally, one of the things Leading Age is very good at is influencing legislation. Mm-hmm. And do you see legislation coming, different legislation, anything on the docket that may interest us as a group or the people we serve?
Well, we rely heavily on government funding for a lot of senior living, be it Medicare or Medicaid. Medicaid is rates are set by the state, so those have been pretty poor in Texas, to be honest. We need to increase those, particularly with the workforce situation. We need to pay people better, and we can't do that given certain Medicaid rates. And then there are other issues in terms of attracting people to workforce. Maybe there's some tuition reimbursement programs and some other things that can be done. And then there's always, as not-for-profits, we're always concerned about tax-exempt status and things like that. So want to make sure those laws are strong.
I think you've set Steve up for a good discussion by talking about tax-exempt status, talking about some of the business model related things and transparency. So welcome, Steve.
Thank you.
So a couple of decades working in senior living. George mentioned the term transparency, and I saw Pam nodding, I saw you nodding, and I think there's been an evolution there. Can you maybe talk to us just a little bit about what you've seen as far as what, as a provider, you're required to share versus what you're willing to share, and then what we've seen our residents expect?
Right. Yeah, from George mentioned the Texas Department of Insurance, or TDI. We are required to provide prospective residents with a disclosure statement prior to them signing a residency agreement. So that disclosure statement includes general information about the community, how it operates, the services it will provide to prospective residents, as well as the most prior audited financial statements, the residency agreement that they will be signing, and then a 5-year projection as well, a financial projection as well. So that has to be provided before they sign that residency agreement. After that, I think it depends on each individual community. We are best practices. We should be providing either monthly or quarterly financial updates. A lot of times it's the executive director on site that will provide those financial updates. We've taken a little bit farther, and periodically I get involved with some of those discussions, and Pam gets to ask me some of the difficult questions.
And she does, doesn't she?
She does.
Yeah.
And so, I think transparency in my time here, my first stint with senior living, I probably was in front of residents, a few times, but now it's much more frequent, and I think that's a good thing.
Just curious, Steve, as you have these meetings, I believe you do them in small groups, and we smiled and we said Pam has questions, but what types of questions are you being asked? Have they changed or evolved through the pandemic and post?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of interest in the financial strength of the organization. With these entrance fees, they can be a substantial amount of money, and so that's dependent on how strong the organization is financially. The management and board governance that is in place for that organization to make sure that, me as a CFO, I'm being held accountable and doing things the right way. But then they also want to understand, what impacts them potentially getting that entrance fee refunded when they either move out or pass away. And so there's a lot of questions about, resales and knowing that occupancy levels are key to drive that business model. So it's evolved over time. It never ceases to amaze me that when we get up there and talk, there's always a question that comes up that I really wasn't expecting. And so very educated residents and ask a lot of good questions and good interactions.
Well, I will bear questions you're not expecting in mind as I go through the next series of questions I have for you. George did a nice job of introducing the terms for-profit and nonprofit and tax-exempt. I believe you're going to walk us through those differences, and then I would follow that up as you're thinking about describing those, how an organization that's accepting entry fees can be tax-exempt and nonprofit. So during your explanation of the difference, if you could maybe tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so nonprofits, we have to file a application to become a nonprofit and get approved by the IRS as a tax-exempt 501c3 organization. And really, we qualify for that even if we accept entrance fees, because we're serving a vulnerable part of the community with serving seniors and providing, in many cases, health services for them. So that's how we qualify for being a tax-exempt organization. From my perspective, I tend to agree with George that nonprofits do provide a higher quality of service than for-profits. Generally, we have no motive to raise monthly service fees for a profit basis. Any revenues that we have that exceed our expenses or profit, it stays in the organization. It's not distributed to investors like a for-profit would. Most nonprofits have a longer term life. George, you mentioned 165 years, some of your organizations. For-profits, a lot of times they make their return on investment for those investors when they sell that property or flip the property to a new owner. Most nonprofits are around a long time. In general, I believe nonprofits have, more non-revenue space. So our amenities and a lot of our wellness programs and stuff are much higher and larger than most for-profits are. So in general, I think that's, a good explanation of the differences between nonprofits and for-profits.
Yeah, I think in our opening comments, Steve, I alluded to how complex just the offerings are for seniors out there, and then you look at a continuing care retirement community, and everything I listed is really on one campus. So that makes, I think, the business model very complex. And then you add in this discussion of entry fees. Can you give us I don't know if it's a CCRC 101, but a very brief overview of the business model and how it works and how the entry fees play a part in the stability of the business model?
Sure, yeah. Entrance fees are a one-time upfront payment that is paid. Many times they're refundable, and that refund provision can be cited by the resident. A lot of different communities are now offering multiple refund contracts. They're a life lease transaction. There's no simple fee ownership in the community, and it really helps nonprofits get the capital they need to build and develop these CCRCs. We typically put them in kind of two buckets. The first one are initial entrance fees. So this is the first time a unit or a resident has been occupied. That initial entrance fee usually goes to help provide operating deficits. If you're starting up a new CCRC, you're going to have some deficits for a period of time until you hit 75 to 80% occupancy. So those initial entrance fees really go to cover those deficits. Then it goes to build to pay off short-term debt. So we want to make sure that our long-term debt is at a level that makes sense. And then the last thing is build cash reserves. Again, as we're having conversations with residents on a quarterly and monthly basis, they're really concerned, okay, how is the organization doing, and will I be able to get my refund back when it becomes due? And that's really dependent on those cash reserves. So that kind of explains the entrance fee. If you want to really look at the CCRC business model, if you will, and kind of walk through how we look at it on an operating cash flow basis, we have monthly service fees that residents pay in addition to that entrance fee. We have other additional services, if you want to go to the spa or you want to get some additional wellness activities. And then we pay our expenses. And most of those expenses are salaries and wages, whether it's in skilled nursing, assisted living staff, or dining. Take the revenues minus expenses, we get net operating income. And normally you want that net operating income to be close to what your annual debt service is. Then on an annual basis, we pay our annual debt service. Capital expenditures, you take some of these long-time CCRCs, they've been around for a long period of time, significant capital assets. You have to refresh those to keep occupancy levels up. So, many of these organizations are spending $2-3 million a year on capital expenditures. So take your net operating income, subtract out your annual debt service, your capital expenditures, and any new refunds you get less from entrance fees, less any entrance fee refunds, and you get your annual cash flow. So that's a very simple business model. I think they're going to show that chart that we have up on the screen as well.
So Steve, you've mentioned entry fee about a dozen times in your overview. It can be a substantial investment. I would ask you, how do I get my money back? Because you mentioned refundable. And I would ask you, while you have my entry fee, how safe is my entry fee? And
so how do you get your entrance fee back? That's going to depend on the residency agreement that you sign and the entrance fee refund provisions in those agreements. These are legal binding agreements between the organization and that resident. And so while they're not a secured creditor, meaning they don't have a lien on the deed of trust for the property, they are, when a refund becomes due, they do become a creditor. And so how do they get it back? They get it back from resale of independent living units and receiving sufficient proceeds on those resale of those units. In general, though, what I would tell you is that they're safe, and what you really want to look at is the financial position of the organization. What is their days cash on hand? What is their debt service coverage ratio? Some of those key metrics that the industry really looks at to determine how strong a CCRC is.
And those are the things you go over then with your residents each quarter.
Oh yes, and if it drops, they'll ask why and want specifics on that. Correct, Pam?
Yes.
Well, Steve, there are different kinds of contracts, right? There's a type A contract, there are other contracts. Can you give us just a high-level overview of the contract types and then what the difference or the impact those contracts have on the fees residents pay, the monthly fees?
Yeah, so a type A or a traditional life care contract is one where you pay an entrance fee. When you move into a higher level of care, you still can't access that entrance fee refund, but you do get a lower fee in the assisted living or skilled nursing area. A type B contract is where you, same situation, but you may get a discount off of that assisted living or skilled nursing fee. A type C is really a fee for service. So once you move over to those other ones, you can either access your refund and pay the full amount of the I guess market rate of assisted living and skilled nursing. So those are the various ones. A type A life care community, typically you're going to have higher entrance fees because there are additional costs involved with that type of contract. There's also additional liabilities that go on the balance sheet. You have future service obligations that have to be calculated each year and are part of the liability section of the balance sheet. A type C contract, a fee for service contract, typically you'll see a lower entrance fee, potentially a lower monthly service fee, lower operating costs for the operator, as well as you don't have that future service obligation.
You know, Steve, I'm sure some folks that were looking at the chart that you had up, and you used the term that some of the initial entry fees are used for the initial startup costs, and you're looking perhaps at an expansion or a new property. I guess, how secure are those funds, and are there any requirements from the lenders to help make certain those entry fees are secure? If I ask the question the right way.
Yeah, so when you're either doing an expansion or a significant expansion or a startup's continuing care retirement community, for nonprofits, most of the time we get our financing through tax-exempt municipal bonds. And these are normal bonds like a city or a government would issue. And they're purchased primarily by large institutional investors, your Invescos, your T. Rowe Prices, your Vanguards, those sorts of funds. And in order to do that, one, you have to have 70% of the independent living units pre-sold before they're willing to actually purchase those bonds. In addition to that, a public accounting firm will have to do a financial feasibility study where they look at the market, make sure that there's enough age and income qualified seniors are in the market, the entrance fees resemble or close to the home values in the area, and then really look at all the assumptions that are in that financial forecast that management puts together. They were required to do an actuarial study to look at the resident population flow through the continuum, as well as a long-term look at what our actuarial balance sheet and cash flows will be. In addition to that, they make all project funds, debt service reserve funds, entrance fee funds. Those are held by master trustee until we reach stabilized occupancy, which is usually 93 to 95%. And then in addition to that, they also have various covenants that we have, marketing covenants, occupancy covenants, as well as that debt service coverage ratio and days cash on hand covenants as well.
Do you have a certain threshold of commitment from individuals you have to have before you go to financing? And if so, what is that threshold?
Well, you're required to have 70% of those independent living units sold. And it's not, I mean, when the feasibility study consultant comes in, they actually go through those files, make sure that there's those prospective residents have meet the financial qualifications, as well as reach out to those prospective residents to validate that these are people that are really considering moving into the community.
Have a wonderful rest of your day, morning or evening, or whatever time you're watching this. Thank you very much.